Let's have the conversation with somebody who's also involved in the Okoa Uchumi movement. And this is the Okoa Uchumi Coalition. So we'll be joined by Daisy Amdany. She is the Executive Director of the Community Advocacy and Awareness, that is CRAWN Trust. It's a change catalyst providing African women and girls with tools, voice, and platforms in which they can effect change within within very many spheres. And Daisy is going to be talking to us because today we want to look at the public debt crisis in Kenya as a gender issue. Daisy, good morning and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
Welcome to the Situation Room. It's lovely to have you. So first, let's get there with the Okoa Uchumi Coalition. Okoa Uchumi Coalition says we are in an imminent public debt crisis. What makes you people say that? And in fact, now let's first of all start by the Okoa Uchumi Coalition. Who does it comprise of?
Well, the Okoa Uchumi Coalition has several partners. Most of them are non-profit civil society organizations that are concerned about the situation, the economic situation, and particularly the exacerbation of the debt situation on the economy. So we have several partners. Among them, of course, it is coordinated and hosted by the Institute for Social Accountability, TISA. And we have several partners who include Oxfam and the Interreligious Council, Kenya Human Rights Commission, Institute for Public Finance, the National Taxpayers Association of Kenya, Power 254, Okoa Mombasa, International Lawyers Project Kenya, Youth Agenda, CRAWN Trust. There are several partners, and it is also open to like-minded individuals and organizations that actually want to raise their voice around the mismanagement of the economy and particularly the implications of debt on Kenya and its development.
So why do you believe we have this imminent debt crisis, as you call it?
Let me ask you don't think that we have an imminent debt crisis? You know, I'm not an economist, okay? However, we know that right now our economic situation in Kenya is not good. When we look at the debt repayment, and I think that, you know, as Kenyans, we focus so much on the politics and all the hype that comes out of the politics that we do not look at the detail of the administration of the state or maladministration of the state, as the case is right now. When you talk about decreased income for government, the revenue collection, and increase in debt repayment, what that means is any headroom for any other spending, whether it is development spending or set spending for services, is reduced. Because remember that debt is a first charge on the consolidated fund. It is a priority. So before government begins to think about salaries, services, and development, the first thing that government must do is make payments on our debt. Now, you rightfully said that our debt repayment for this year is close to 1 trillion shillings. It is 904 billion shillings. That is money straight out of our coffers, right? And then when you look at other spending that the government needs to address, like salaries and payments to commissions and judges and all that, actually the government is left with a gaping hole, even in terms of meeting recurrent expenditure. So services and other economic and social rights take a hit because money cannot then be put towards that. So when we talk about this debt and we look at it, we must ask ourselves, the investment that went into procuring this debt, has it been useful in being able to generate some kind of income or return on investment, or are we just putting money into a hole? Are we getting the return on that investment? And of course, that is a question that many people answer as no, because we are not seeing the return on the investments that we've made. However, we do see every effort being made to shake us down to be able to pay these debts. So it does not benefit us as citizens, and the investments really, by and large, do not benefit the overall citizenry. What this means is that there is less money that goes into critical sectors, particularly for women, healthcare, water services, education, all those social services that majority of citizens are dependent on, and it's that much worse.
Daisy, and we will come to that and look at, the impact of not having sufficient funds then to finance our other operations would go like, and because that is a crucial thing. But she started by asking the question, let me ask you, you don't think we're in a public
No, I actually don't
crisis?
think, no, we don't. We're not in a debt crisis. What we're in is a crisis of leadership. Because if you look at debt around the world, people talk about, it's not just looked at as debt, it's considered debt to GDP ratio, okay? So you look at what is owed, and then you look at what you produce, and you quantify it and give it a value in dollars. There are countries that owe staggering amounts. If you look, for instance, we're talking about $1 trillion. If you are talking about, say, for instance, China, of course, they are a terrible example to give, but you're talking about $5 trillion. So this, dollars, yes. So, but what they produce is also equally interesting. And their percentage, as we speak now, is only 54.1%. Their debt is 54.1% of their GDP. Now, Japan, they have a ratio of 236%, meaning what they owe is a lot more than what they actually produce. But it doesn't matter because it's an economy that knows how to manage it. That's why I'm saying our problem is not one of debt. Being in debt as a country is not an issue. It is how that debt is managed, and that brings the discussion back directly to the leadership. If you talk about a crisis, the debt issue is a symptom. It tells you what the leadership has brought us to. We are on our knees because of the leadership style of those who are in power. That's where the crisis is.
I think I agree with you, but also when it comes to the definition of a debt crisis, I don't know. I'm not an expert in finance, public finance management, and the rest. But I would assume that a debt crisis is when you get to a point where you're unable to pay. So if we are still raising more than we owe, then we are able to pay the debt. In terms of debt crisis, maybe not. But in terms of maybe budget crisis, financing, development, maybe now we'll be talking about what is it that we can do with the extra 400 billion that we are left with after we've paid off our debts. Is it a debt crisis? Is it not? It's maybe a choice of words that we could be asking ourselves. And Daisy is still back online. Is it about a debt? Is it a debt crisis per se?
I wouldn't call it a crisis. I mean, if you want to be basic about this, really basic, and they tell us that we have 400 billion remaining, why don't they just divide it equally among all the 47 million Kenyans and tell us to fend for ourselves? If you want to be basic. But that won't happen, and things don't happen that way in an economy. We expect this money to go into the sort of activities, development activities, social activities that will make the lives of the citizenry better. And this, I believe, is what Daisy is actually getting to.
Yep.
Yes. And we don't see this happening. So the debt is in our face, and we look at it because it now becomes an extra burden. But the debt was never the problem. It is those who manage our affairs who are a problem.
It is public finance management that is an issue, right? And Daisy, you can still come in here. It's how we are managing our public finance, how we are managing the money that we collect, how we are managing the allocation and the appropriations of the money into the budget, and also how we are managing the projects that we set out to do. Because many of the times the people will question, so you've borrowed X amount of money for a specific project. Let's say Eurobond 1, Eurobond 2. There was an issue with Eurobond 1. It was borrowed. It was meant to go into specific projects that had been said, this is going to development. And then I remember Raila Odinga asking the questions, where is the money? And there were allegations which were not disproved that some of that money was used to finance recurrent expenditure. So when those questions then arise, it is about how we are managing our finance and the impact that has, because you still have to repay that loan. You borrowed it. You still have to repay it. But has it had an impact on the people that you needed it to benefit? Daisy.
Yes, well, I want to agree with Muga. I agree with you that our problem is a spending problem, okay, and the priorities for which the expenditure is being incurred. Now, I think the real problem lies with Parliament, because we continue to allow Parliament, who are supposed to be the custodians of the public purse, have not reined in the executive and have allowed them to go on a spending spree and a borrowing spree. Because if we know that our income, that what our revenue is going to be this much, for instance, if we know that KRA is only able to collect, our revenue collection will be like 1.8 trillion, why then would you make a budget for 3.2 trillion? Because automatically, by passing that kind of a budget, what Parliament says is that it gives the executive the leeway to borrow. Okay? That is one. So when the budget is presented, instead of looking at the priority of our spending and the investment that our spending is going into, we allow the government to spend on non-priority projects. Because if you look at majority of the debt that has been procured, it has been for many of these major infrastructure projects, which many financial experts and economists have questioned the prudence of those kind of investments and the return on that investment. But of course, we know, and we have been told by many experts, that it's vendor-driven and it's padded for the purposes of personal gain. So it's actually development for corruption.
Yep.
So if there's any benefit that comes to the people, it's purely incidental. So that is problem number one. Number two, when you say that we have 400 billion less, actually we don't. When you see that the debt repayment, revenue collection is estimated to be 1.8 trillion. Debt repayment is 904 billion. Recurrent expenditure is 800 and something trillion. That's eaten up all the money. So you don't even have money for the counties to go down to the counties. You don't have money for development spending and for services. So already we are in a problem, and we are in a debt crisis. Let me remind you some of the things. When we look at some of the actions that have been taken by Treasury, that tells you that the government is actually in distress. About 2 or 3 months ago, the Treasury asked that all parastatals and these parastatals hand over the money that was in their charge.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
We saw last month, I think, that Postal Corporation, which is a parastatal, was not able to pay their salaries. Why? Because the government had taken their money. Why had government taken their money? Because government didn't have enough money on hand to meet its obligations. So this general scramble for looking for money from anywhere and everywhere is an indication of debt distress. Mind you, there are also certain actions that the government has put in place. For instance, there's a moratorium on retirement in government, and people are not asking why. The government pension bill stands at 1 trillion shillings. That is not even computed into the 7.7 trillion that we are talking about when we look at our debt. That is held separately. So the government has now put a moratorium on government hiring, but also on retirement, because retirements are going to increase the pension bill.
Yep.
That is an indication of distress, government in distress. So for all intents and purposes, we can see that government is indeed in distress and is scrambling to pay its obligation. So for me, when the government begins to borrow, even just for recurrent expenditure, much as there has been denial on the part of government that no, we are not borrowing for recurrent expenditure. But when we look at the numbers tell us that borrowing is going towards recurrent expenditure. It means at some point we are going to default. We will be unable to meet our obligation. And we need to start looking at what does that mean. So Parliament, instead of coming up with some kind of debt management plan where we begin to rein in the executive and begin to negotiate. And remember, some of these loans that have to be paid are private debt. So it's not the kind that you can negotiate, like with the World Bank and maybe postpone or reorganize the payment. Those payments have to be paid when due, and any action of trying to reorganize the debt is considered a default measure. So Kenya is not in a good place, and the blame actually lies squarely with Parliament, because Parliament are the ones who have allowed the executive to be irresponsible. They are there to represent the people. They are there to guard the public purse against abuse, but they have allowed the executive to make unreasonable budgets. And I remember even there was a time, I think the governor of Central Bank, when he heard about the budget, the size of the budget, he laughed because he said it was unreasonable. Because for you to be able to meet those budgetary requirements, you are not going to be able to meet it with your revenue.
Yep.
So why are we allowing government to plan for us with our money? And because remember, there's nowhere government goes to make money. It gets money from us. They are spending on projects that do not benefit us, but at the end of the day, we are the ones who have to pay. And the resultant effect is increase in taxes, reduction in service delivery. We need to pay taxes, but we pay for the private good. We must pay privately to get the same services because government is not able to deliver it. And there's a general crush on the economy. And of course, with COVID now, it is not
things get worse. So yeah, we are now coming up with some even more phrases. So there is the imminent debt crisis. We are talking about government in distress. We are questioning the role of Parliament as the watchdog and also this is a budget making Parliament in how then it goes ahead to approve a budget that has so many inconsistencies that only just point towards you need to borrow to meet your budget shortfalls. So all those questions we're going to be discussing as we continue this conversation, but also we will bring now the conversation into the gender. Why is this debt issue a gender issue as well? Why is it a gender issue as well? Daisy Amdany is the Executive Director of Community Advocacy and Awareness, that is CRAWN Trust. We are talking about the imminent debt crisis, as has been called by a coalition called the Okoa Uchumi Coalition. The coalition called Okoa Uchumi Coalition is calling this an imminent debt crisis. And Daisy has taken us through what is causing them to believe that there's an imminent debt crisis. Government appears to be having some financial distress to finance the day-to-day operations. We already know how much we're borrowing. We already know how much has been projected by the National Treasury as revenues collections for this year. We already have seen the Kenya Revenue Authority saying it's unlikely to meet their targets for Q1. So that already tells you that even what was expected to be raised, obviously with the COVID-19 and all, is not going to be realistic. So if we were able to raise about 1.4 trillion shillings last year without COVID, how much are we likely to raise this year with COVID?
Less.
Less than that?
Infinitely less.
Okay. How much we paid in debt last year was, as Daisy mentioned, is over 930 billion shillings. That's going to rise this year.
Yes.
So how much are we left with to run the operations? Give 316 billion shillings to the counties. That is for operations in counties. That this is development and expenditure and recurrent expenditure in the counties, national government, the national projects and the county projects.
The maths here isn't even the issue in my mind, Erica, because the way our leaders think, or the people we foolishly decided to refer to as our leaders and entrust our lives to, it is that even with the best of circumstances and we had money, they will mismanage it. And we will end up exactly where we are. Daisy asked a very valid question. Why is it then that Parliament allows the executive? We are in this unique country where the executive and our Parliament seem to be joined at the hip. It seems to be one and the same thing.
They run one another.
Yeah, they just pat each other on the back and say, so what are we discussing today? Okay, we need more money. How much did you say you guys need? Okay, now, since you are thinking of giving us this amount, there's this little detail of the things that we want. In addition to the grants that we have, in addition to the very rosy house loans that we get, in addition to the allowances that we get, can you consider a certain percentage as a package? We see it playing out in the media every so often with Parliament wanting
that
this
just sounds like 30 pieces of silver.
Yes, exactly.
But you see it all the time. That's the negotiation that would happen.
Yes.
That you'd allow you as a budget-making parliament, you sit down, you look at, this is what the National Treasury is saying that they want, this is how much they need, and this is their capacity to raise, this is what they did with the money that
we've got that, yes.
gave them last year.
Now they
want more.
The thing is,
if you want more, just give us
I'm making a parody of it, but to me, I wouldn't even dare say it if I didn't see or if I didn't read about the drama that always takes place within our parliament. And the drama is they want more. They want this pension. They want this allowance. When you say cut off the allowance, they're the lawmakers. They'll go and squash it. Not quash, squash, meaning they obliterate it completely. So when you see this, you have no option but to determine and say, you know something, we have a parliament that seems to sing the same song with the executive. Yes, it's just that we don't see it. They seem to say words which are different. But it's a symphony. It's just that one sings on a higher tone, one is on a lower tone, but they are in sync, and that's why we are where we are. Because in all honesty, surely, if you talk about stringent measures, where do you think the stringent measures ought to come from? It ought to come from Parliament. And what do? They just allow a certain free flow to continue, and they, in my opinion, are part and parcel of it. They're entrenched in it. They're invested in it.
In fact, when you even talk about now the way they behave, look at the Parliament, the budget statement that was taken to Parliament before this year's then budget was passed. And the budget committee looked at that and they raised a number of issues. So you want us to continue financing the Big Four agenda. We don't even have an implementation matrix for the Big Four agenda. We have nothing against which to judge this implementation or to gauge the progress of these projects. But okay, we shall give you more money as you wanted. This is the question that keeps arising. But also we have to have the question and ask ourselves, what is the impact of all these things, all the drama that we see? And it appears like it's a game between the members of parliament and the people in the executive. What impact does it have on us as a people? And today we're discussing this with Daisy. What's the impact of this on gender?
Eric, pause. Just even before you get to gender, and we'll get there, the High Court in this country agrees with us, agrees with this discussion we're having. Because from 2018, this very parliament has been passing laws disregarding Senate, passing laws which the courts have said, was it 23 of them? These things, forget about it. Go back to the drawing board and start it all over again. Now, what does it tell you about the mindset? If you call them rogue, you'll be describing them in a rather polite way. How do you go about this business as though you are this autonomous body that can run roughshod over every aspiration that this country has? Now, unfortunately, the brunt of these things are felt by women and children. Unfortunately, that's the reality.
What is this brunt, Daisy?
First of all, thank you, Muka. I wish other Kenyans would be as outraged as you are, because we really ought to be outraged. Parliament is the main culprit in this thing. But before I answer the question around the gender issue, let me also just paint a picture as to why Parliament has allowed us to go this route. Why we have come to a point where the Parliament does not rein in the executive. You know that there is this thing called the National Government CDF Fund. And the CDF Fund is pegged at a percentage of the total budget. So the bigger the budget, the bigger the allocation to CDF. And that is the incentive for the members of parliament. So for them, they look at what is coming to them, because you know that CDF allows them to have some kind of patronage, to be able to dole out development, and make it look, you've seen how things are listed with them putting their pictures. This was done by MP so and so.
Honorable so and so school gate project.
So that is primarily one of the biggest problems that we have. That this percentage peg on CDF and the budget allows them to allow government to bring these lofty, unreasonable budgets, which then necessitate the borrowing, because you automatically have big holes in your budget, so you have to plug in those holes. So in essence, what Parliament does by approving those financial budgets that the Treasury brings, when it is approved, they've actually given the executive the green light to traverse the globe looking for where they can get money.
Yep.
And of course, they don't also rein them in on corruption. Now, the implication to women is, and let me not just say women, but it's a gender issue, because first of all, it has an impact on everybody. Because the more that government spends on debt repayment, and the more we have the deficits, the budget deficits that require government to borrow, we have seen the negative effects. One is government coming to borrow within the domestic market, despite the president assuring us that the reason why the government was taking the Eurobond was so that it didn't have to come to the domestic market. They not only borrowed the Eurobond, which is a commercial loan,
Yep.
they went on to now come and borrow locally, crowding out local businesses, because for the bank, it is more profitable to lend to government because it's more assured. There's less risk involved there. So the financial sector then becomes constrained for ordinary borrowers. This has the impact of then shrinking opportunities within the economy. So job losses, we've seen. How many companies have we seen gone down? How much capital flight have we seen out of Kenya? So you're talking about job losses. Now the impact is that much more severe to women. We have several female-headed households. You can imagine if, as a young man or an individual, you lose your job, it affects only you. For women who have to care for family, and majority of them looking to the basic needs of family, that lack of employment has a devastating effect on the household. The government, on the other hand, doesn't make any direct investment towards them. For instance, the president announced that the Inua Jamii program under COVID had disbursed 10 billion shillings.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
if 10 billion shillings has been injected into this economy, we would have seen it. We need accountability, because majority of people who benefit from that Inua
Jamii.
Yes, Inua Jamii scheme are women, the vulnerable, the orphans and vulnerable children.
But Daisy,
And
are you
those
saying that the
people-
money was not disbursed? Have you heard from anybody
Has
who
the
is
government given us proof that it was?
But have you heard from anybody who is a beneficiary of the Inua Jamii who says that I have not received 8,000 shillings? I have heard from people who say that they received the 8,000 shillings.
I know that there are people who received, but what I am questioning is the amount that is being stated. Because you know what that does? When you give, if you give me 8,000 shillings, what you do is you create, if you give me and a host of others 8,000 shillings, you know what that does?
Yep.
It spurs the economy within the region, because people will spend. People will buy food. People will they will spend that money. So we will see movement within the economy. Okay? If that amount is about 10 billion shillings, trust me, we would see a very different movement within the economy. So
I'm inclined, I hate to do this, but I'm
I'm
inclined to push back on this, Daisy, because what you're implying is that there's a possibility that this money has not been sent to the beneficiaries. This is just 10 billion shillings for Inua Jamii. And Inua Jamii is a specific number of people who receive 2,000 shillings from the government ordinarily. Now it was raised for them to receive money worth 4 months, and that is 8,000. On top of that, there has been the other money that has been going to the communities, the 1,000 shillings that's been going to the vulnerable households every week. So if you are saying that we would feel, and yet it's true, there are people who say that they have received the 1,000 shillings they keep receiving every week. There are those that have been receiving the 8,000 shillings. How would you say that we would feel an impact? What impact are we looking for?
Listen, Eric, I'm not disputing that people have been receiving. I'm not disputing that, because I also know people who have been receiving. What I'm disputing is the stated amount that government is saying has been disbursed through those channels. Because if that amount was as significant as that, 10 billion shillings is not pocket change. It's a significant amount of money. we would not see the kind of lamentation that we are talking about. We would not see the traders, because there is a section of our communities that have actually not received these monies because they are not considered vulnerable, but they're also not considered big business to be able to attract government support. So you're talking about the micro, small business enterprises. Now, that money would ideally be spent within those circles, okay? However, we are not seeing that kind of growth that testifies of that kind of an investment. So I'm not saying that money has not been given. And what government would do for us to be able to give some kind of accountability and transparency would actually be to publish the list of beneficiaries. Like, for instance, we at CRAWN Trust, by the way, we also gave support through our donor partners, right? Who gave us, who we were able to work with some of our network partners who fell under the categories that the government does not see because you are considered as being able to meet your day-to-day needs. And we were able to disburse some money, and not even that much, okay? But we were able to disburse some money to them. And trust me, there was a significant change in, just among them. Now, what I'm saying is, if government were to be able to publish this list, we would be able to verify the amount. I'm not disputing that they are giving that money. That money is given, and it's given regularly, even when there's no COVID. But I'm questioning that amount.
And I think the questioning is appropriate because, indeed, public money being given for a specific purpose, not only should it be auditable, but there should be clarity as to who it went to, the frequency with which it went, and what have you. But bear in mind also that if you as an organization are giving out money, you have the wherewithal to actually follow it up, and you will have details of it, all right? The truth of the matter is that the government has, among the many failings it appears to have, is it doesn't speak out about the things it actually does well. There are many things the government actually does, but we don't know about it, so we can actually assume it hasn't been done. But this matter of the money that we speak of, we've discussed it before in the show, and we know for a fact that money did reach. It may not have reached everyone to whom it was intended, but it did go out, and it may have made changes, but there was no one monitoring to tell us the sort of changes that it made, unlike your organization where you've actually been following it up and monitoring it. You see, Daisy, for the first time in 2020, March this year, the government, through the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, actually set in motion something that we had never done before. We wanted to get a poverty report to comprehensively analyze poverty in the country. And it's something that many people don't even know existed or it was even tried. But they were looking at 7 indicators: malnutrition, sanitation, education, water, information, housing, among other things, health. That's what they were looking at. And they did go through this thing. Now, again, the government doing what it does best, it doesn't talk about these things. So one doesn't even know about the findings of what they did. And what you may find is that their finding actually agrees with what you're saying. Government finding, not anybody else's. Government finding will agree with exactly what you're saying.
Impact of
what this thing has and how
the community.
Yes, the gender disparity.
Yeah.
That women tend to be impacted negatively even more than men. Men are impacted, yes, but women more. And when you talk about a country like Kenya, you mention women, children come in tow. It has to be women then and children. Yes.
So what's the way forward?
And the elderly. And the elderly.
And
Don't
the
forget
elderly
the elderly. Because women also look after the elderly, the infirm. So when you have government services, healthcare services, weak healthcare services, women become the frontline providers of healthcare. They do a lot of the unpaid care work. Aside from the meeting the day-to-day needs in terms of food and care, it is unpaid care. So it takes them away from any productive work. So even in terms of being able to expand some of these direct cash injections, into families, like set an amount. I mean, I don't even know how government has come up with the figures, like deciding that a family should get 2,000 shillings, but maybe peg it on the number of children. Maybe say 2,000 shillings per child per household, of up to 5 children, so that you're actually making an impact that will actually be beneficial to them, because you will be surprised how much they're able to do, even with that little that they get, which is why, Eric, I'm questioning the figures. But I do agree that there are things that government does well. You know, I don't want to look like I'm only, you know, criticizing them. There are things that government does well, but we do know that even many of these schemes are riddled with corruption.
True.
You know? And so it would be good if they would be able to publish to us those beneficiaries and the amounts that those people got, so that you are able to track the level of impact.
I agree with you 100%. An audit of all these, not just Inua Jamii, Kazi Mtaani, the other social support programs.
That Harambee Committee.
There's the Harambee Committee. There's about close to 40 billion shillings that we're talking about that has been spent during this COVID-19
And we don't know very much about it.
That is meant to be for just social support.
But we don't know about it.
Yep.
Again.
We don't know exactly how much. And the impact that it has had.
But Eric, if I may say something, you see, why I focused on the leadership and the lack of that said leadership thereof is this. There is the power of example and role modeling that goes with the leadership. The government may dish out money, but the problem is not the government taking out the money. It's at the point where it's supposed to be distributed. Sometimes that's where the problem is. You find the people who are at that point want their share. So either they ask, well, you will be given this, but this is the percentage we take. Now, someone will say,
to be on the list, you must accept.
Yes, exactly.
A 20% cut.
Yes, and then someone will say, but you will send it through M-Pesa. Yes, indeed, you think M-Pesa is foolproof. If that toll station is there before it enters the system for M-Pesa to be paid, that 20% will be deducted before the M-Pesa transmission. But again, this is now the power of example that is being seen from what I would like to call absent leadership, not poor. It's not there, because if it's there as it should be, such things would not arise.
Daisy, you are doing a good job by raising this conversation about debt with your CRAWN Uchumi Coalition. What I'd like to ask you as we conclude this conversation today is, what is it that the coalition then is advocating for? What do you want to see happen?
Well, first of all, we want to see public accountability in debt management. You know, we cannot continue like this. This is irresponsible administration or maladministration of the state. First of all, it would be a good thing if the government could actually publish that debt register and the whole of it. Because you see, as I said earlier on, debt is being held in different places.
Yep.
We've got this debt that we know of. This is the multinationals, the bilaterals, you know, the sovereign debt, which is what we talk about, the 7.7 trillion shillings. Then we have the pension bill. Then we have government guarantees to parastatals, the MUMIAs, the KQ, and all that. All this is government debt. So let's put the debt on the table and come up with a debt management plan, because we need to pay this debt. But the measures cannot swing aggressively against the ordinary mwananchi. We also want Kenyans to become more aware and begin to engage with the discussion around the economy and debt. Unfortunately, for many people, it is considered a very esoteric discipline. You know, people don't know how to engage with this conversation. However, debt and the economy affects us directly. This comes straight into your house. As they mismanage the affairs of the state and the economy, ultimately it is we who have to pay the price, because we see increase in taxation, increase in the different levies that government tries to levy on fast-moving goods to be able to get as much money as possible. Unfortunately for us, the people in the treasury are not creative. Their best efforts at generating income is to tax us to
more.
You know, exactly.
Tax the daylight out of you.
We're not talking about constrained government spending. Government must stop spending on non-priority projects. The essence of the economy should be that the economy works for everybody. If we're going to borrow, let it be borrowing for the benefit of development or any kind of investment that will have a maximum benefit for the people and a return on the investment, whereby it creates an enabling environment for all of us to thrive.
Yep.
It shouldn't be that we just have shiny objects and, you know, infrastructure all over the place that is not of benefit to people other than the ones who have conceptualized it. So what Okoa Uchumi is seeking to do, first of all, is to raise awareness on the debt situation, to raise awareness on the economy, and to call on Kenyans to engage. You know, one of the things that under the new constitution we've been given, which is a great responsibility upon Kenyans, is public participation. We cannot sit and complain about the maladministration of the state, about Parliament's lack of oversight, and refuse to engage. Because ultimately, it is our lives that are being destroyed.
Right.
This Kenya is the country that we have.
Right.
We don't
and you have a partner in us because we like having these conversations. As Okoa Uchumi, we'd like to have you again so we can have this conversation going forward and also seeking ways in which this can then be redressed. Thank you very much for joining us, Daisy Amdany, Executive Director of CRAWN Trust. Have a good day.